So, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome on behalf of the Executive Committee of our Radboud University Medical Center for you all. It's great to have you here today. I see a lot of students, patients, doctors, nurses, scientists. Great that you have come to us today. This Radboud Grand Round promised to be a very special one because of the topic and also because of the presenter, Glyn Elwyn. And the topic is important for us all. It's about shared decision making, and we want to go as a Radboud University Medical Center for the patient as a partner, also in the decision making processes. So shared decision making is important for us all. Glyn Elwyn, Glyn, you are a Welshman from origin, and now you work in the Dartmouth Institute in New Hampshire. And that's a very famous college. It's one of the 9 Ivy League colleges in the United States. And you are an expert in the field of shared decision making, one of the most famous experts, I think, in the world of shared decision making. We are very proud that you are here now. And you lead a research group that focuses on measures around shared decision making and and you investigate tools that are important for the patient participation in the decision making process. You are responsible for more than 300 PubMed papers. I saw yesterday on the website, and you have a Hirsch index that's very high, and I can only dream of that. It's more than 60. And we as Nijmegen can also be proud on Glyn Elwyn because he did his PhD thesis in Nijmegen. It was 2001, I believe, under the supervision of Professor Richard Grol. Glad to be here, that you are here, Richard. And you're also a visiting professor at IQ Healthcare Department here in the Radboud University Medical Center. So Glyn, dare to share. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for my invitation here, Jan, for organizing this. And to Gert Westert for having me in his department. Thank you very much. They tolerate a lot, actually. And to Richard, you already heard mention, for accepting me here to Nijmegen in the first place. So he got a strange email from a Welshman in Cardiff, and he was unwise enough to take me on board. Thank you all very much. Now, I have a few competing interests, and I need to declare them. Mostly intellectual competing interests, actually, but I think it's also important to declare those. You'll hear mention of option grids and collaborate, and I'm responsible for those, and I'm kind of trying to get them used. So bear with me on those. So those are my competing interests. But I have no pharmaceutical ties or device industry trials. I imagine that you have been a patient at some point in your life, maybe recently. And I want you to put that patient hat on now and think about this item, this question. It has a scale of 1 to 9. And the question is, how much effort was made to help you understand your health issues? If you score a 9, then you left that consultation, that encounter, being fully satisfied that you were well informed about the issues and also any alternatives that might be facing you. Can you mentally make a score for me? Second item, how much effort was made to listen to the things that matter most to you about your health issues? Listen, truly listen, and curiosity about what matters to you. Score that again on a scale of 1 to 9. And then how much effort was made to include what matters most to you in choosing what to do next. Again, please score that. We use this measure, and I'll tell you a bit more about this measure later on. We use this measure to determine the patient's perspective on shared decision-making. This is called collaborate, a measure. How many here have a score in their heads of 27? You can't have more. 3 9s is 27, right? How many here have a score of 27? I can't see a single hand, actually. 26? 1. 25? 2. 24? Okay, a few more. How about anybody under 21? Okay. Anybody under 18? No. Oh, yeah, a few, actually. Okay. So when we use this measure, we give doctors a top score, the percentage of people who give them 27. So that's a very hard goal to get. Nobody here gave their clinician 27 out of 27, a top score. I want you to remember that, because actually that's bared out in some research that we're doing. Now, I gave this title to Jan Kramer, Sapere Aude 2.0, and he said, no, you can't have that title. He gave me then the beautiful title, actually, of Dare to Share, which is, he got rid of the Latin, which is actually the whole theme of this presentation. This idea of dare to share, dare to know, sapere aude is the Latin for dare to know. And it's been used by these guys, Horace, 20 BC, Kant, and then Michel Foucault, different guys, right, different people. Horace used it for a person standing in front of a stream, trying to decide when to cross. And somebody asked him, well, why aren't you crossing? And he said, I'm waiting for this stream to stop flowing. You'll be waiting forever. What this stream, what this idea is about starting something, daring to do something, daring to know. Sapere aude. And I think it's a beautiful phrase. And I want to come to it because I think we're at this stage in medicine. Who here knows who this is? It had a big influence on me, in a way. It's Martin Luther. And he is responsible for this sapere aude, translating the Bible into German. And actually, the one who got translation method right for the first time, he checked with other people, other friends, is this the right word in German for this Latin word? Hebrew, actually. It's a very important book, as you can imagine. It's 1522 that this happened, and it was responsible for the Reformation. And this is the phrase that he used, and I think this is a beautiful phrase, for we are removing impediments and difficulties so that other people may read it without difficulty. And I think we're at this stage in medicine. We're removing impediments and difficulties so that the population, the people, can actually understand what's going on in medicine. Now, this is what he probably would be looking at as one of his texts. Dixit tec deus, fiat lux, et facta est lux. You're probably more familiar with this. And God said, daar sei Licht, and daar werd Licht. It's true? That translation was, when was it? 1667. So 100 years later at the German version. But this led to great changes, I would imagine, in the Netherlands. And I want to ask you about this address. Another big important persona in the Middle Ages. Any ideas who lived here? Close, very close. In fact, Spinoza learned a lot from this guy. Who said this? Descartes. Yeah, most people know it as cogito ergo sum. Right? I think, therefore I am. Actually, he wrote his work in French. He's the first philosopher, really, to say, I'm going to write in my own language. He wrote it in French. Few people know that he joined the Dutch state army. And here's where he did a lot of his mathematics, actually. He was also had a relationship with Helena, a young woman in Amsterdam, because that was his address where he lived. And he had a daughter who died at the age of 2. He went to Leiden and then to Utrecht, and actually wrote most of his work here in the Netherlands. He was an empirical rationalist, as you can see, and he laid the groundwork really for the scientific method. Here he is saying, I will not have any prejudices, I will avoid being precipitous about my judgments, distinctly as to exclude all ground of doubt. Really important kind of evidence-based medicine, if you like, in the first flush, right? He would have been very happy with Gordon Guyatt and David Sackett. In Nijmegen, you've been building on this guy, Edward Deming. Richard Grol's quality improvement work is world famous, and he's been building on this. Same idea, rather more succinctly put. Now, what about me? Where do I fit into this? Well, I come from here. I want to say quickly, I'm not from the castle. That was built by the English to keep the Welsh under control, because we're a troublesome lot. I come from this bit here where it's raining, from the mountains. And I used to go to this kind of establishment, a chapel, not the Anglican church, not the Catholic church, but a chapel. And I went to this kind of place 3 times on a Sunday. That was responsible for how I am now. And now I work here, but I also am so delighted to work here, because this is one of the most important research centers, I think, in Europe. And it actually is a big leader, not only in quality improvement, but bringing patient-centered care to the pioneering work of shared decision-making. And here's where I did my thesis with Richard Grol, and be ever grateful for you. Now, who is this guy? Do you remember the date? Which year is it? It's 1982 when he became Prime Minister. A long time ago, and this is the first time this term shared decision-making was used. It's quite a while ago, huh? This is a definition that I've been trying to simplify for a very long time, and here's what I think it's all about. Trying to get it much simpler than some of the definitions. It's really helping, and bear attention to that verb, helping, a person develop, and that's important, develop, because it takes time, an informed preference. Both those words are important again, informed and preference. And here's the model I've been talking about when I'm teaching this. The first task is to make sure that we're forming a team with the patient. This is hard work. It's novel work. People are not used to being involved in tough decisions. You mentioned that this is really hard for some people, especially when they're ill and incapacitated. And we have to respect the role preference to say, I don't want this right now, it's too difficult for me, but I would like to hear about the issues, actually. But maybe you will take the decision on my behalf once you've understood what matters to me, and that's still shared decision-making. But you can't really get to people's decisions until you've explained the alternatives to them. Alternatives need to be visible. And that I call option talk. Team talk first, form a team with the person in front of you and, if necessary, their family as well, and then option talk. And the curiosity comes when you really try and understand what matters to them, what's really their priorities in life, so that you can shape that decision to fit into their life circumstances. And there's a journey that they have to go through, from initial preference to informed preference. And that journey, the psychologists called preference construction. We don't have these preferences inside us. We have to really build them, construct them. And this whole process, I think, is called careful deliberation. Now, this is another model, a bit more elaborate, that we cannot do this until we recognize alternatives, help the patient do the comparative learning, construct the preferences, and do this preference integration. And we need to measure this if we're going to see if it's happening in practice. And this all has to happen in a very constructive engagement, in a very good relationship. And then there's the context of which we could go into. But here's the problem we've been having. This is not a pipe, clearly. It's a slide of a pipe. Not really. It's a slide of a photograph of a picture by Magritte. It's 3 layers deep, this pipe, right, at least. And this problem we're having in shared decision-making, because we've been trying to convince ourselves that we can do shared decision-making by using patient decision aids. Here's the earliest version from Boston in 1980. The nurse guiding the patient through this elaborate screen, which takes about an hour to go through. Patient decision support is very helpful. It gives patients information about options, outcomes, and probabilities. And here's the classic systematic review. I'm going to just walk you through the results of this systematic review now by Stacey, building on the work of O'Connor. We can be confident that the trials show that patients increase their knowledge, more accurate risk perceptions. The decisions are congruent with their values, and there are actually a reduced number of patients choose to have less major elective surgery. We're less confident that they reduce cost, and we're less confident that it leads to adherence to decisions. But there is some evidence coming about adherence. There's very little evidence that they change the interaction between the clinician and the patient if you use these tools ahead of clinical encounters. In other words, you give them out to people ahead of time. They don't really lead to change in the communication. Partly because of this, they've been over-engineered. They take normally 30 or 40 minutes to go through, and they're full of information that is designed for people at a fairly high level of education, actually. This is one brochure for a decision aid. Just look what's going on here. Clinician nicely talking to a patient, using a decision aid on screen. Well, I think this is fiction. No encounter does this. No clinician stops to use a video like this and go through a decision aid in the clinical encounter. This is fiction. So the idea was that patients would do this at home. They would go and watch a DVD or a website and walk through 30 minutes of this kind of information. And that also is a bit of hope. Because actually, people don't spend more than a few minutes looking at websites with these kind of information. We've actually studied that. So it's a problem. Information on its own is not enough, because there is a massive implementation challenge. And Richard has often asked me to say, why is this? Why is there such an implementation problem here? It's a black hole, actually. There are many trials, and no hospitals on earth almost are using these tools. I don't think they're in Nijmegen, and not in Amsterdam either, or Rotterdam. So there's a problem. And I'm going to come to another Latin phrase. Francis Bacon, that knowledge is power. If we give people knowledge, patients, power, not knowledge, won't they become more powerful? Who says yes? Okay, there's a few. This is Michel Foucault, who analyzed power in great depth and said this is actually institutionalized in the way we organize things, in the way clinics are run, and the way we do things. And actually, I think in medicine, knowledge is not power, not immediately, not really. And one of the best papers I've been involved with is this. It's done with Dominic Frosch in Palo Alto. Now, Palo Alto is next door to where Google sits and Facebook, and there are many, many kind of dot-com billionaires and millionaires there. It's the most privileged area on earth, if you like, with rich, educated people. And we did 6 focus groups with these people in Palo Alto. And we said, what is it that stops you asking questions and making demands of your doctor and being curious and so on? Well, they said, they were hesitant to share their existing knowledge. These people are on the internet day in, day out, but they were hesitant to share their knowledge with their clinician. They have many questions. They said, I have many questions to ask, but I dare not. I dare not ask them. Why? Why would they? Because they didn't want to be considered a troublemaker. Right? They didn't want to be labeled as a difficult patient. And here's the killer. People were really afraid that they would get worse care if they have a different opinion to their clinician. Now, this is an indictment on medicine, that people think this if they dare to ask questions, to dare to know. And we studied a range of other kind of sociological and qualitative studies that are not in the medical journals, but actually we found lots of evidence that patients are disempowered when they are in front of the clinic. And giving patient decision tools is not shared decision-making. Shared decision-making is about supporting informed preferences. Back to Luther. How are we going to do this? How are we going to do this with people? I often show this cartoon and I ask people to imagine a caption, a bubble. Who is saying what to who here? And I ask people to give me some ideas. Anybody willing?
The doctor is preaching.
The doctor is preaching. Somebody else? Any? The patient is asking. Any suggestions? Convince the patient with the writing. And your? Okay, who says? So here's a very interesting one. Actually, it's the patient who has the glasses. And they're saying, because they've been given a tool with some information on it and they've been supported to use it, I prefer this one. In other words, they've been comparing some alternatives. This is the shift that I think is at the heart of shared decision-making. Now, this is one of my total failures. The website devoted, I think I did it 10 years ago, to breast cancer, trying to give people options about lumpectomy versus mastectomy. Total failure. Did a trial, published a paper, never got used. But it had a page in it with a table in it. And this is the page that most people went to. And this gave me the idea for an option grid. And we've now published 38 of them. And here's an example of one of them. Breast cancer surgery. Very simple idea. Embarrassingly simple. Columns with two choices and a column with what are the questions that patients most frequently ask? That's it. And you compare across. What is removed? Lump, whole breast. Let me give you to the next question. Which surgery is best for long-term survival? Oh, they're the same. Imagine that. What are the chances of cancer coming back in the breast? 10 in 100, 5 in 100. That's a difference. That's double the difference, right? That's a big issue. Will I need more than one operation? Yeah. And it goes on in that vein. And actually, radiotherapy requires 6 weeks of return visits to radiotherapy. And your breast actually shrinks often, becomes tender, and for somebody without any transport or without any relatives, that's actually a hassle. And if you're elderly, that may not be the right choice for you. That may not be, depending on your preference. So these tools, we say, please give it to the patient, explain the layout, because people don't often understand tabular layouts. Give a pen so that the patient can write on it. Almost a transfer of power in the very act of giving a pen, and use it to have a conversation. Now, we've got some trials of this. This is a circumcision tool. Parents having a baby, a male baby, having to decide about circumcision. In America, it's quite commonplace, actually. It's more than 50%. When we used an option grid here, pre-intervention, this measure of shared decision-making called observer option was 16. We gave people an option grid to use. It jumped up to double the amount. So we saw clinicians talking to patients in an entirely different way when we used this tool. Before we used this tool, they used a consent form. They say, I'm bringing you a consent form because we need to explain this consent form to you. Here are the problems with circumcision, but here are the benefits. Please sign here. The assumption was consenting. But if you use a frame which is about comparing having a circumcision to not having a circumcision, the conversation changed to one of comparison. And it changed, actually, the number of questions the patient was willing to ask. And the doctors, interestingly, 4 weeks out after using the grid said, you know what, that changed the way I approach this. Now I compare, I don't just use the consent form. It's a simple tool, but it had that effect. Here's a wedge trial, stepped wedge trial we've done with an option grid for osteoarthritis. And here's where we are now, making picture-based versions of these tools so that people wanted less text and more graphics, important for health literacy issues. But I still think we've got an attitude problem here in medicine. People, when I talk about or train, say this is too difficult, this is too, patients don't want it, and so on. And we've seen actually that very few practitioners, when you look at their practice, do shared decision making. I think one of the problems we have is that we don't have a patient perspective on this process. So we designed Collaborate, these 3 questions which I mentioned to you earlier, and just some data for you from this. We developed it with patients. We checked those phrases very carefully so that they wouldn't have the name options or preferences or decisions in the phrases. They're phrases that people understand pretty quickly. We gave them simulations where in some consultations there was no shared decision making at all, and then we created scenarios with very high shared decision making, and we tested this in an internet panel of about 1,500 patients and showed that the scale discriminated amongst high and low shared decision making. I think it's very difficult to prepare those kind of data without some team saying, why are we getting such different scores? So we are removing impediments or difficulties that people may read it without hindrance. That, I think, is our challenge. How do we make it easy for people to become engaged in this process? One of the things that patients are doing are recording the encounters. Written about this. They're doing it without your knowledge sometimes, quietly and covertly by leaving their iPhone on in their pocket. They may well at some point ask you permission to do that. Some institutions are offering the patients to record and give them a copy. Put it on the portal. This is the brave new world. This will change practice. This will change practice. So my summary then. Dare to share. Remove power barriers if you can. It's difficult. White coats are power barriers. Try some collaborative tools. Option grids are not the only ones. There are plenty more. Measure performance. Feed that back intelligently and put it on the organizational agenda. Now, I know it's on the organizational agenda in Nijmegen, which is why I love coming here. It's one of the pioneer hospitals in the world, so I'm very pleased about that. Sapere aude. This dare to know rings out all over the world, I think, in medicine right now. And this is a portrait or a picture, painting by Aimé Remref. Imagine this being Helena, Descartes' girlfriend, looking at her ultrasound, understanding what's going on, or maybe listening to her smartphone, that recent consultation that she had. Dare to share, Nijmegen. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this impressive lecture. It was great to have you here. Please join us the upcoming years in this voyage of exploration to share decision making. And ladies, we have brought a little present for you. It's from our famous Rijksmuseum. A small
Thank you very much.
present for you.
It's an honor. Thank you very much.
Dames en heren, nog 2 mededelingen. Er is nog even gelegenheid om een drankje met elkaar te drinken en eventueel nog vragen aan elkaar of aan Glyn Elwyn te stellen. Volgende keer, de 3e maandag van oktober, hebben we de volgende spreker op de Grand Round, de 37e. Dat zal Ab Klink zijn, vorige oud-minister van Volksgezondheid, nu bestuurslid van VGZ. En die zal het hebben over kwaliteit als medicijn. Tot dan hopelijk en voor nu een fijne avond en tot de volgende keer.